Well, the train left here late in the evening, just the one steam engine, the one crew.
Well, you got to watch the rocks, the mountains. There's hills here that will go against you.
You've got cliffs that go up maybe 500-600 feet.
So about 4 o'clock in the morning or so, they're doing approximately about 35 miles an hour. And the next thing they would have saw was this rock slide.
If you are wondering why you are watching a Canadian railway story, and it isn't the one about the very last spike, that's understandable. Craigie Lockey had that picture-perfect Kodak moment. This story had few cameras about, but what happened along the north shore of Lake Superior was equally monumental.
Canada was all in parts really until the railroad come through and joined everything.
Sections of track had been constructed all over the country, but it wasn't possible for a train to go coast to coast and stay in Canada.
There was lots of track laid west of Thunder Bay, but this location here on the north shore of Lake Superior was a big holdup, which is why you have this monument east of town here, like where east met west.
Early route plans favored connecting east and west by going south of Lake Superior, going through the United States.
But they decided once they got in the Sudbury area, okay, we're going directly northwest up to Lake Superior and over top of it because the railway needed to stay in Canada.
Well, this section through here that made it Canadian was probably one of their toughest sections to put through because of the terrain.
They followed the north shore of Lake Superior through this area, which was a very rugged piece of land, and being at that time everything was done by hand.
No roads, no towns. Now imagine no power tools. The Trans-Canada Highway, like here in Nipigon, parallels the original 1880s CPR route. In 2017, 130 years after the railway was built, new highway lanes are being added. They're just a short distance from the tracks and cut through identical rock. Look at the machinery involved. Now imagine doing this by hand.
What they would do is they'd have two fellas on a hammer and one fella turning the drill. Every time the hammer hit, he'd have to rotate the drill a quarter of a turn. You had to trust the fella on the hammer if you were holding the drill.
Must have been one heck of a job, I'll tell you. You sit there all day and bang on a hammer with a bit on the end of it. Maybe gets 5 or 6 feet in a day by hand, I don't know.
They would be a lot of holes because they used black powder at the time, and the rock had to be small enough that they could move it basically by hand. Like wherever there was an open space, they built trestles, and then later years they dumped and filled over the trestles, and the trestles are still in the ground underneath the rock.
When they couldn't go over the uneven terrain, they'd go through it.
When I look at that, and I'm going through that when I was running trains, I used to wonder how the mountain basically stayed there when they blasted the original hole, because there's so much material above it. You know, it makes you wonder how they were able to do it in the first place.
Well, they worked dusk till dawn. As soon as the sun started to move, you were up and out at her until it would turn dark.
Well, it must have been awful hard because, you know, there was no restaurants or that. You went to the camp and you ate what the cook fed you, and if you didn't like it, well, you were SOL, you know.
And I imagine it was deplorable, like the smell and everything else compared to today. You wouldn't even think about anything like that.
And that wasn't all. The temperature soared in summer and plummeted in winter.
When I started on the railroad, the temperature of minus 60 degrees was in the norm in the White River area, and we worked in the minus 50 and 60 weather with trains.
The brutal amount of work eased as locomotives brought steam power to the forward section. But every summer, the insects arrived.
Mom had stuff that she made up in the house to stop the bugs from killing us, but I imagine back in the 1850s, it must have been really, really bad with them mosquitoes because they are a real bugger. They were bad, real bad.
You gotta use a lot of McCurdy's. You gotta cover yourself with McCurdy's and sometimes bear grease. You gotta put a lot of bear grease on them, to tell you the truth, because if you stop working, they'll eat you alive, so you gotta keep on going.
And keep on going they did. This 200-kilometer section of railway had been called an engineering impossibility, but its completion was crucial to the vision of Canada.
This interesting little piece of history is a surveyor's roll, and it's all made out of cloth. This particular roll is approximately 35 feet long, and it shows all the elevations of the railroad, the bridges, the soil types, everything. Bottom line is this little piece of history is actually paper that turned the railroad into the real rails.
Years ago, we were isolated 100% until the railroad came along. It tied the east to the west without any doubt at all. What people have got to understand is the way it was done with the sidings.
With only one track for trains going either direction, sidings were needed to allow one train to pull over while another passed.
At every siding, from Scriber to White River that I know, there was a station. And each station had a man living at it, working there, and they usually lived there with their wife and their children. And each one of these stations were just like Jackfish. That's what these people did. That's what kept the railroad tied from east to west. In our town of Jackfish, there was probably 30 or 40 houses, but remember, big families. In our family, there was 9 of us, and the guy down the street, he had 12, you know. These section men built the railroad and kept it going. It's that simple.
With the CPR, Jackfish had grown from a remote fishing village to an important fuel depot for locomotives.
The ships brought coal in there for storage and shipped to Scriber and Chapleau and all over for the steam engines. And I never missed any ship or boat coming. And back in those days, nobody had cameras, we couldn't afford it. So we don't have many pictures of anything.
Next door to Scriber, Rossport took advantage of lots of winter ice and the new rail line to get fresh Lake Superior fish to southern markets.
They would go and cut the ice out of the lake, and they would stock it into the ice house so that when the passenger train came along, they could put it into their dining car to keep the food cold.
Northern fish destined for markets in Toronto and Montreal no longer needed to be smoked to make the journey.
Oh, it was critically important. Once the railway came, as fish were packed in these boxes and iced up good.
And then we put it on the carts for the express train during the night. They had refrigerated cars to take it to Montreal and Toronto.
But even as times changed and life became more routine, this remained a sometimes harsh environment that could quickly extract a hefty toll from a tightly knit community.
Well, the train left here late in the evening, June the 9th, 1910. So about 4 o'clock in the morning or so, they're going through Coldwell, which is a siding there. And the train is sliding around a left-hand curve. And the next thing they would have saw was this rock slide, you know, huge boulders. The engine ended up veering to the right, got knocked to the right, and the pony wheels were probably ripped off the engine, and down the embankment they went, along with 2 boxcars. They wouldn't have seen what was about to happen for very long, half a dozen seconds or so, at that speed.
Decades later, a dedicated deep-water dive team with new search technologies helped find the wreck of 694 in 235 feet of water.
Because the fireman's body was never found. The group here in Schreiber that chartered a boat and they had a burial at sea ceremony back in 1910.
A loss like the wreck of Engine 694 would touch everyone on this thin strip of community, this extended family.
I worked on the railroad, and my great-grandfather worked on the railroad, my grandfather, my father, and my children.
In those days, everybody worked for the railroad. The brothers, and sisters, the neighbors, everybody. It was just a family-oriented place.
We were connected to the CPR because we worked there. We did a lot of things there. Some of our old people used to work on the coal docks and on the coal ships for the steam engines. We used to be fishing guides. They used to advertise in the trains they wanted wonderful lakes to come fishing. And they used to have our people being guides on the trains. When I was born, my parents and all my family came up by the train. That's what they tell me. And they would come home by the train. People would travel by the train. There was no roads here. There was no roads. All you had to have is a canoe or a train.
Everyone was proud of their railway, proud of the work their families had done in tying the country together.
Everybody looked after what they had, and they were proud of the CP Logan with the beaver on it. I worked in the roundhouse, and they'd bring the old steam engines in, and we had to wipe them all down with a sort of a Varsol and oil, make them clean. And it used to be nice too to go to the roundhouse and go in there and see all those beautiful locomotives all sitting there, and each one in a stall, you know. And beautiful to see, you know. And I still think of how lucky I was to be able to move one of those steam engines. And I was only a kid then, 18, 19 years old.
They are a magnificent machine, a magnificent machine. I used to watch the steam pop from them, and the smoke coming out of the chimney. They were just beautiful, and they were huge.
Watch them take off, and the steam and the smoke and the noise.
Well, the steam was gushing out of them from both sides, and the black smoke was flying up from the top from the coal tenders.
I just fell in love with the terrain, and I took a lot of pride in doing that job, and really just loves it.
There wasn't two trips the same. The lake was maybe like glass going up today and come back this afternoon. The waves would be 3 or 4 feet high. Sometimes the waves washed right up, splashed right up on the track. Every trip was like going on a little holiday, and I enjoyed it.
Many who visit this area exclaim, "I had no idea this was here. It's spectacular." They might say, "I had no idea what those people did. It's incredible." A fully Canadian east-west link that ensured Canada would be one.
It's just what it did. It tied the east to the west.
It tied Canada together right across from Montreal right through to Vancouver.
It made us united. It made us one. It made us a whole nation.
Sir John A. was on the bit when he done that, and built the railroad.
5,000 horses, at least 410,000 railway ties, and 1.5 million spikes. The 12,000 men who built this section of railway came from everywhere, but worked as one. They not only tied the ends of a brand new country together, they left a uniquely Canadian imprint on the world that endures today.
If I had to say one thing about the route through this part of Canada, would be right up there with the Great Pyramids that were built. I would have to use that as an analogy. There would be no difference in the task that was done.